Hi, everyone. Welcome to today's workshop. It's 12:30, so we'll go ahead and get started. Thank you so much, everyone, for taking the time to join us out of your busy day, your lunch break. I'm really excited for today's workshop, and it's really relevant to the holidays and everything that's coming up. So today I'm joined with Dr. Nishi Bhopal, and the conversation for today's workshop is going to be balancing blood sugars and mood over the holidays. So Thanksgiving's coming up, if you celebrate Christmas, New Year's, all the holidays. So we want to talk about how our nutrition, mood, and mental health can be impacted and how we can stay on top of our health goals during the holiday season. And while we're kind of going through the beginning parts of the presentation, I'd love to hear from everyone. If you have a favorite holiday dish, if you can write it in the chat, share it with us. And if you have any questions as we're going along, please write those in the chat as well, or you can save them till the end and you can turn on your audio or your camera to ask those questions. Okay, so a little bit of information about our practice at Pacific Integrative Psychiatry and what makes us really unique. So we take a whole body approach to mental health. So we take an integrative, holistic approach that uses things like psychiatry. So in psychiatry services, we provide medication management and integrative forms of treatment. We also offer psychotherapy, which involves coaching and mindset work. And then I provide one-on-one nutrition consultations that take an individualized approach to your gut health, the link between the gut and the brain, and how we can use food as a way to help you achieve your overall health goals. Okay, so these workshops, we are resuming them recently. So in the past, we used to have them once a month, and now we're trying to bring them back. We have typically a different topic or a discussion topic each month, and they fall typically on the third or fourth week of the month. We used to have them in the evenings, but now we're offering them during the daytime, around lunchtime for most people on Tuesdays, so around 12:30 Pacific Standard Time. And the entire workshop is recorded. So even if you're not able to join in the future, we still recommend signing up because we do a complete recording that we will send to you afterwards. So you can watch back, play back in case you miss it. And we highly encourage participation. It's welcome writing your questions in the chat, comments as we go. And we usually provide a worksheet that you can use as well to take notes, write comments, goals, things like that. And then lastly, please respect everyone's privacy. People are sharing personal things on here or things that maybe they don't want to share with others, or if they're talking, please respect that and try to minimize distractions. Okay, so here's where we'll be going today and the topics we'll be discussing. So we'll definitely talk about nutrition over the holidays, how food can really be impacted by the holiday season. We'll also talk about the link between nutrition and mood, or our food and mental health around the holiday season. And then we'll talk about how to manage your blood sugars. So what fluctuations in the blood sugars might look like and how this can impact your hunger, your food cravings, your food choices. And then together we'll come up with a personalized goal that you can set for yourself, something that you can take away and actually apply over the holidays. These are the topics that we'll be going over today. So you can set a personal nutrition goal for yourself, something that you can take away. And then at the end, we'll wrap it up with a Q&A. If you have any questions, again, you can write them in the chat, or you can come on the audio or your camera to ask those questions. Okay, so I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And I have Nishi here with me, who's an integrative psychiatrist and sleep specialist and founder of Pacific Integrative Psychiatry. Hi, Nishi.
Hi, Ailar and Kirtana. Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. So this is a really relevant topic. I think we've got Thanksgiving around the corner and then all the other holidays, which often come with food as celebration, right? So we're going to talk about how to navigate all of that. And just a few disclaimers, what we're discussing today is not medical advice. So if you have specific questions about your medical situation, please talk to your healthcare practitioner about this. But we're sharing kind of general knowledge about how to navigate some nutritional issues and how that can impact our mood and anxiety and energy levels. And also another quick disclaimer is that, much of the research on nutrition and mental health is still emerging, right? So we're going to be sharing kind of what we know so far, and we're always excited to see kind of, how the research unfolds as time goes on and as we learn more. This is meant to be interactive. So if any of you have questions, comments, anything you want to share, please feel free to jump in. You can jump in and turn on your camera and speak, or you can share in the chat as well. And so again, if there's questions, comments, feedback you want to share, don't be shy. So let's start by talking about the connection between blood sugar fluctuations, mood swings, and energy levels. And I think sometimes it's not always clear. I was actually talking to a few patients recently who shared that they noticed that, you know what, my anxiety got worse, or some of my symptoms seemed to get worse. And I realized I was hungry. I didn't even make that connection, right? So what is the connection, and why is there, or why is it important for us to be mindful of our blood sugar levels when we're working on energy and anxiety?
So when it comes to our blood sugars, this is our body's way of kind of using food for energy, right? We eat something, it's very normal. All of us experience a spike in our blood sugars. Our body turns a lot of the food that we eat, starches, carbohydrates, into sugars to get energy from them. And what happens afterwards is through the use of a hormone called insulin, our blood sugars are supposed to come back down into what's considered a normal range. So if this isn't happening for us regularly, let's say we skip a meal or our next meal is delayed and we don't eat for several hours, then we're still awake. Most of us, we're still active, we're using energy, and our blood sugars start to go down. So we tend to experience a state of hypoglycemia, or very low blood sugar levels. And a lot of us might be under higher stress levels when our meals are delayed or skipped. So let's say you're busy, maybe you're active, you're at a dinner party, or you're maybe even busy preparing food and you forget to eat yourself. You might be busy at work. I know, especially with the holidays coming up, a lot of people tend to try to wrap up things, wrap up projects, things like that before the holidays start. And then that stress can actually suppress your hunger too, because the body prioritizes the fight or flight response, and it doesn't really make hunger a priority. So just like you said, Nishi, when we're in that state of low blood sugar, hypoglycemia, then we start to get a little bit jittery. Maybe we can't focus as well. We start to seek actually more comforting foods to help us reduce that stress. And at the same time, our brain is telling us to eat something to get the blood sugars up as quickly as possible. So it's no wonder we start craving sugars, carbohydrates. That all sounds good, sounds comforting as well. A patient was telling me today, I've been snacking more on sugary foods, desserts, I'm under a lot of stress. And that's completely normal. Your body actually wants that to feel comforted, but understanding what's going on and why it's happening, I think, is a really good place to start for preventing it. So did you skip a meal? Are you experiencing more stress? Or maybe you're not having complete or well-balanced meals?
Yeah, that's really helpful. And I think, just to underscore that, the symptoms of low blood sugar look very similar to the symptoms of anxiety. As you mentioned, the jittery feeling, difficulty with focus, feeling a little bit kind of out of sorts. Even sometimes people feel a little bit dissociated when they're hungry as well, or when they might not realize that they're hungry, but their blood sugar may be dropping. And so the other thing that happens when blood sugar drops is you get a surge of epinephrine or adrenaline, which is the fight or flight hormone, right? So we get this kind of anxiety-like response. So there's so much overlap between the symptoms. So let's maybe talk a little bit about the holidays specifically. And I think you kind of touched on a few things. One was the timing of meals, so not waiting too long in between eating, so your blood sugar doesn't drop. You touched on the combination of foods, so we can look at that in a bit more detail, how the combination of foods can actually affect your energy and your blood sugar. And then also, you speak a lot about mindful eating and how we eat. And it's lunchtime right now, so I hope nobody's skipping their lunch right now. So please, eat your meals, and we'll talk a little bit about mindful eating, and maybe in a future lunch hour workshop, we can actually do a whole mindful eating practice during the workshop. So, but Ailar, I'll turn it over to you. So can you speak a little bit about holiday meal planning and the impact on blood sugar and energy and mood?
Yes. So one of the most important things that I recommend pretty much to all my patients is don't skip breakfast. It can be very common around the holidays. You're expecting a big meal. Maybe you're going to multiple gatherings and you wake up, maybe even you wake up a little bit later because you have the day off and it's normal. You get up later and then you just want to have that big meal next. But what can happen is, again, you can start to have those anxiety-like stress, higher stress level symptoms from having lower blood sugar levels. And this can cause you to maybe not make as healthy of choices when you go to that next meal or holiday dinner or party, things like that. So definitely don't skip breakfast. And if possible, try to start your day with a nutritious breakfast that contains protein. So protein helps with controlling our blood sugars, and it can actually give you energy and sustainable energy to get you through your morning. And ideally trying to have lesser amounts of sugary foods, even caffeinated beverages first thing in the morning. They can also have that impact of suppressing our appetite. They can even impact our blood sugars later on in the day when the caffeine starts to wear off. And then suddenly we realize how hungry we really are. So either delay your caffeine intake or maybe skip it that day and start the day with a nutritious breakfast. And when you get to that holiday party, or even if you're hosting, try to look for a combination of different foods that can help you create more balanced meal. So when we talk about a balanced meal, we're talking about the different, people know them as macronutrients. So we have our protein, we have our carbohydrates, and then we have our fats, or I refer to it healthy fats because we want to try and stay with the healthy fats as much as possible. So the protein helps the most with controlling our blood sugars, and plant-based sources, you can find them in things like legumes, beans, lentils. You can find them in soy-based protein, tempeh, tofu, things like dairy products, yogurt, cheese. Nuts and seeds are also a good source of protein and a little bit of fiber and healthy fats. So maybe there's appetizers and you see some nuts there that you can snack on while you're waiting for the meal. The healthy fats include things like avocados, olive oil, wild fatty fish, and again, the nuts and seeds. And then we have our starches. So basically anything that has flour, starch is a carbohydrate. So things like bread, rice, potatoes, corn, tortillas, pasta dishes. So our goal is to combine these together rather than making a big plate out of just one of them. And that's how we can create a balanced meal to help with our blood sugars and also our satiety, so we don't feel super hungry right after having that meal, or even feeling really tired and fatigued. And now we can't even socialize and, interact with the people that we're at the party with. And then you also touched on mindful eating and intuitive eating. So a lot of this has to do with checking in with yourself. So I think it's really important to kind of think about the holidays as not just the holiday itself, but what comes before the holidays. So preparation for the holidays. Are you preparing meals? Are you preparing yourself for the holidays, mentally, physically, having to do with your nutrition goals, your health goals? And then we have the step that's during the holidays. So what goes on during the family gatherings, the meals, and then after the holidays. So kind of checking in with yourself and seeing what are your goals before, during, and after. What are some realistic goals and expectations that you can set for yourself? Is your priority your nutrition? Is it your exercise? Maybe you just want to get a 30-minute walk in that day. And then you just want to say, okay, it's one day a year, I can eat whatever I want. Maybe your goal is hydration. You're trying to maintain your hydration that whole day, limit alcoholic, caffeinated beverages, which can dehydrate you and also, again, put you at greater risk of having low blood sugars. So I think that check-in is really important. And then when you're there, you can feel a little bit more comfortable with yourself, knowing, okay, I expected this. I knew this was going to happen, and I'm happy with my goals and where I'm at. And then during, I think, the holidays, just paying attention to your satiety cues and hunger cues, which can be hard when you're around other people, you're socializing, you're talking. So knowing that you ate a nutritious breakfast, I think, is a really great way to help you avoid having to check in so frequently, because now you're feeling a bit more satiated. But then at the same time, maybe you can have a little bit of an appetizer, or you can eat something, a small portion, and then know that you can go back and get seconds. it takes time for our body to send signals and let us know when it's full or when it's still hungry, which can be hard to do if we serve a big portion and we eat really quickly. So I would say, taking the time to eat slowly, maybe chew your food a little bit more and serving a smaller portion.
And we have a question from Dr. Rai, which I think, yeah, it's a great question because, so much of the foods that we're exposed to over the holidays are high glycemic things. So potatoes and dinner rolls and pies and pastries and all this kind of stuff. And so Dr. Rai's question is, would you recommend anything specific, keeping in mind the population with diabetes and anxiety disorder?
Yeah, that's a really great question. So I work with a lot of patients who either have diabetes, type 1 or type 2, or they're pre-diabetic. And I'm in the process of becoming a certified diabetes care and education specialist. So I think this is all so relevant and there's such a huge connection. And a lot of times, your family members or other people might know that you have diabetes, or maybe they don't know. So I think just knowing that with yourself, or maybe having someone there that we talked, in a previous session about an accountability partner or someone that can help support you and help you make better choices. But at the same time, not make you feel bad about your choices either. So when it comes to diabetes, basically our main goal is to help keep our blood sugars in this normal or what's considered manageable range most of the time. And if you start your meal with a starch or a carbohydrate, this causes a spike in the blood sugar. So for diabetic patients or patients with diabetes, I typically recommend eating the protein first. So if you serve yourself some starch, potatoes, pastas, and you have the protein, the veggies, try to eat the protein first and maybe a little bit of veggies and then have the starch. And if possible, look for starches that are more complex or higher in fiber. Because what happens is when we eat our starches, like I mentioned, they break down into sugars, right, to give us energy. And the simple starches like white bread, white rice, white potatoes, corn, these break down into sugars much more quickly. So they cause a sudden spike in the blood sugars versus carbohydrates that are more complex, that have fiber, like whole wheat, multi-grain sources of breads, quinoa, wild rice, sweet potatoes. The body has to work harder to turn them into energy and sugar so they don't cause a sudden spike in the blood sugars in the same way.
What would you recommend as far as a plant? You sort of touched on this already, but plant-based protein. So I'm thinking about maybe the person who's vegetarian and maybe, diabetic or pre-diabetic and experiences anxiety, because oftentimes the vegetarians are stuck with the high starchy foods, right? At family gatherings and things like this. So what would you recommend for plant-based protein sources?
Yeah, so for plant-based or even vegan, vegetarian options. So first, knowing that there's going to be an option for you to eat, I think is really important. A lot of times when you get invited to someone else's house, especially if it's not a family member, they might not be familiar with your dietary needs, or even if you have dietary restrictions, like you're allergic to something or intolerant to something like gluten or dairy. So first, knowing that there's going to be something there for you to eat. You don't want to show up and then suddenly see there's a bunch of meat, things that you're not able to eat, and now you're suddenly really hungry. So either bringing in your own dish, if that's an option, maybe they offer potluck, or, you maybe let them know ahead of time. And a lot of people can be open to this and try maybe a plant-based option or a vegetarian option for a dish that they're already making. So the legumes, having things like Kirtana mentioned, like chili, like a healthy chili. You put a lot of different types of beans, legumes in there. You can even do plant-based types of meat. They have this one at Trader Joe's that's made with like lentils, which is really good. And you can just cook it in there for some extra protein. Again, things like nuts and seeds as an appetizer option can be good. Dips like hummus, even avocados have a little bit of protein in them and healthy fats. And then you can do like Nishi, you mentioned like a stuffing. Maybe you put a little bit of tofu, crumbled up tofu in there that you might not even be able to taste with all the spices, but that's giving you definitely some extra protein too.
That's so helpful. And actually, yeah, it's interesting you mentioned tofu, because I've discovered these recipes using silken tofu as like a cream base. And so it's really high in protein. And then another plant-based protein source that I've been enjoying is nutritional yeast. which is also a great source of vitamin B12, but very high in protein. And you can mix it into these sauces and things, or if you're putting together like a nut and mushroom loaf or something like this, you can mix it in and it gives you really good protein. So yeah, great tips. Thank you. So what about, I mean, we're kind of already talking about this, but more tips for navigating holiday gatherings, social events. You know, we've spoken a lot about, you know, things to kind of avoid a little bit, or ways to navigate the foods. I think another aspect is, like we talked about at the beginning, food is celebration, right? So maybe some mindset tips going into these different sorts of gatherings and parties and celebrations, maybe letting go of guilt that might come up around eating certain types of foods, or feeling like you need to stick to a plan, because that can lead to restrictive behaviors and other things that maybe aren't really serving us. So could you speak a little bit about the mindset piece?
Yeah, absolutely. And just like you said, it's supposed to be a celebration. I think, you know, especially if you are so focused on meeting your health goals, it can actually take away from that celebration, actually resting over the holidays, taking time off, things like that. And one thing I always say is, think about it. This holiday is happening once a year. So Thanksgiving is once a year, Christmas is once a year, New Year's is once a year. And what tends to happen is when these holidays kind of progress and they get clumped up together, it tends to feel like it's much longer than just a couple of days. So first, again, just having that check-in with yourself and knowing, okay, it's once a year. How often do I eat pumpkin pie, right? So, you know, maybe it's just once a year. So you can enjoy the pumpkin pie, you can eat it. And at the same time, knowing that there's a difference between your body's physical response to the food that you're eating versus your mental response to the food that you're eating. So a lot of times we talk about this gut-brain connection, and we talk about the association between how we think about the food versus what our body's actually responding to it. So are you actually intolerant to an ingredient in the pie? Are you actually intolerant to the wheat and gluten? Or are you thinking of it as something that's unhealthy for you? And now there's stress associated with the fact that you're eating it, and now your body's rejecting it. Maybe you're getting abdominal pain, bloating, things like that. Versus if you just comforted yourself and said, it's okay, you know, I love pie, it's delicious, and you eat it, then you digest it much better. So just kind of separating those two together. And then at the same time, knowing that restrictions, just like you said, can create unhealthy relationships with food. So if you see a bunch of desserts on the dessert table and you tell yourself, I can't eat that, I can't eat that, then there's that unhealthy relationship where you're feeling restricted. And at the same time, you're, you know, not eating it the one day that it's being served, the pumpkin pie, let's say again. So I think just knowing that what you're doing that one day is not going to ruin all the hard work you've done the rest of the year. So a lot of patients are working so hard, they're eating healthy, they're exercising, sleeping well, staying hydrated, and they think that maybe just by eating unhealthy that one day, all that hard work is going to get ruined. And it's not, right? So you may not sleep as well that night. Maybe you tend to feel a little groggy the next day. Maybe you don't have as much energy to exercise, but then kind of bouncing back and just saying, hey, I had a good time. That was fun. You know, I enjoyed what I ate. I had a good time at the party, and now I can get back to my goals. And knowing what your priorities are with that goals. And I recommend just sticking with at least one or two that you're not going to compromise over the holidays. It doesn't have to be every single goal. So I talked to a patient this morning and I said, what is your priority out of the hydration, the exercise, and not skipping breakfast? And, you know, for her, it was just maintaining that 30-minute walk 4 times a week. So just sticking with that over the holidays, and then maybe your nutrition changes a little bit, maybe your hydration changes, but then we can revisit that later. So I think that that's all really important too.
I love that. Yeah, having some flexibility around it, and then having maybe your 1 or 2 non-negotiables. I think that's such a great idea. And, you know, we spoke about in our Instagram live last week about the Ayurvedic, like in Ayurveda, they say, whatever you're consuming, take it with confidence. Mm-hmm. So, you know, if you are sitting down to have that piece of pie, really enjoy it, savor it, like eat it sitting down, take a break between bites, notice the flavors and the textures and the aromas, and really enjoy the experience. And it does change how your body responds to it. If anyone has questions, again, we've just got a few minutes left, so please feel free to share those. I have a couple of questions for you, though, in the meantime. So you mentioned delaying caffeine. in the morning. So how long would you recommend waiting before having, your morning coffee or tea? And then any tips on navigating hydration and alcohol? Because, glasses of wine are flowing often at this time of the year, or other types of alcohol. So how would you recommend people navigate that?
Yeah, so I would say for the coffee, if you're using this as a way to wake up in the mornings, it can make a really big difference of how your body depends on it or is used to it at this point. So some people just like the aromas. They like to have a cup of coffee for, just enjoyment with their breakfast. It's not really something that they need to wake themselves up. So if that's something that you are dealing with and the caffeine is your way of waking up, I would say waiting at least an hour, ideally an hour and a half before you have that first cup of coffee, because again, your body has the chance to wake up naturally on its own. It affects the way your hormones are impacted, your hunger levels, like we talked about. For some people, if you have the energy to go for a short walk, maybe do some yoga, get the blood circulation, those are also natural ways to wake your body up, or even just looking at the sunrise. Now the sun is coming up a little bit earlier, which is really nice. So if you wake up earlier, maybe just looking outside, looking in the distance, looking at the bright colors of the sun. So about an hour, but ideally an hour and a half, especially if you're not doing any physical activity or being exposed to bright sunlight. Navigating, I would say, alcohol consumption and even caffeine consumption on the holidays. Like in my family, we drink black tea like all day long, even into the night. We're having black tea at like 10 p.m. So that's definitely a challenging one. I know sometimes maybe people opt for decaf teas or herbal teas, if that's an option where you're having your meal and just asking for that instead of the caffeinated beverage. For alcoholic beverages as well, this is, something that a lot of us do at social gatherings. Maybe you're having some wine, some beer, even some hard alcohol, but knowing how it's going to affect you, I think is important as well. Just like you said, knowing, okay, maybe I'm not going to sleep well tonight. Maybe I'm going to be a little bit dehydrated. Having electrolytes can help. So your body's way of staying hydrated on top of just having plain water, especially if you're consuming alcohol. I think having electrolytes the day that you're consuming it versus waiting till the next day where you're waking up already with that headache or feeling groggy. And then lastly, swapping between alcoholic or caffeinated beverages and water or sparkling water, which might be available at a lot of dinner parties or gatherings nowadays. That way you can maintain that hydration. And then lastly, starting your morning with a cup of water. I think this one's super simple. When you get up, any holiday day it might be, just have a cup of water as the start of your day. That way you're already ahead.
Excellent. And then there's one last question before we wrap up, which is from Kirthana. Kirthana, do you want to ask your question to Ailar?
Hey, yeah. I actually, something that I find or have trouble with is hydration, and like especially during the holidays because I'm eating a lot more. I feel like I'm drinking the same amount of water as before, but I'm obviously eating a lot more starchy foods, which tend to dehydrate me. What do you recommend other than increasing my water intake? Like, how can I increase my hydration?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And if I'm not mistaken, Kirthana, you are vegetarian, correct? Okay. Yeah. So I was actually listening to a podcast that they were talking about a study recently that said a lot of people who eat plant-based diets actually excrete a lot more electrolytes and sodium through the urine compared to people who don't eat plant-based diets. So that might be the case for you. And that's why drinking electrolyte enhanced water or even adding packets, like I started doing that recently, it can do so much and it can keep you hydrated a lot more than just drinking plain water. I know it can be a lot, especially if you're having a big meal. If you're drinking large amounts of water, it can cause things like heartburn, acid reflux, bloating, disruptions in the digestive tract during the day, which we also want to try and avoid. So the electrolyte enhanced waters can, help you if you're drinking even just 64 ounces of water a day. You can feel like you've drank a lot more versus having to actually get up to that 90, 100 ounces.
Is there an electrolyte packet that you recommend?
Yeah, so the one that I've been using is Element. I know that that's one that's been really popular recently, and the reason I really like it is because the first ingredient isn't sugar or anything like that. It's not even in the first couple ingredients. I think the first ingredient is sodium, which, sometimes I just even put some sea salt in my water when I run out of the packets. I just like dump some sea salt, which tastes very similar and it helps a lot. So it's spelled LMNT. Yeah, the link is in the chat here, and you can buy it on Amazon. You can buy it on their websites. The watermelon is my favorite flavor so far. So that's a really easy thing to do, and it definitely helps me stay on top of being hydrated. But again, you can even just do some sea salt. If you have higher blood pressures, again, make sure to ask your doctor before having any type of higher amounts of sodium beverage. Yes, Kirtana said, and there's one called Liquid IV. Yeah, the Liquid IV ones are, I think, also really popular. I have tried them in the past. I don't remember the exact list of their ingredients. So a lot of them are sweetened with things like stevia or monk fruit, which again, don't spike your blood sugar. So in the case of someone who does have things like hyperglycemia, diabetes, so you don't have to be concerned with that. But make sure that the first ingredient is not sugar or something that's not an electrolyte, such as a mineral like sodium, potassium, magnesium, zinc. We definitely don't want that to be the main component of the electrolyte. Good. Oh, Costco brand. Yeah, okay. I guess Costco brand has one too. Kirkland.
Ailar, I have one more question.
Yes.
That we said limit or try to push the caffeine intake for like an hour to 90 minutes. Is that also for breakfast as well? Do you recommend we push consuming anything until then?
Yeah, that's a great question. So for breakfast, I definitely recommend eating it within the first 1 to 2 hours of waking up. It's kind of like your body's way of getting energy. A lot of people say they don't have the appetite in the mornings, and I recommend just doing the simplest thing possible, even if it's just a spoonful of peanut butter, some nuts, a cup of plain yogurt, whatever is appetizing to you. But what happens again is if you delay your food intake, then your body is going to get really hungry. And again, you're going to crave more starches and carbs versus if you were to have something earlier in the day. Plus, if you are consuming caffeine, that way your digestive system is already working before the caffeine has a chance to get in your body and actually suppress your appetite. Yeah. Any other questions? All right. So I'm just going to share my screen. Great. So as a part of today's workshop, I recommend selecting something that's personal for you. So something that can help you enhance your awareness of your body physically, mentally, having to do with your nutrition, maybe even your digestion, and just making this goal really specific for yourself. And you can share it with someone if you need like an accountability partner, someone to help support you, especially someone who's attending maybe the dinner parties or gatherings that you're going to with. So these are just some examples. So maybe your goal on Thanksgiving Day is to not skip breakfast. So your goal is to get up, and maybe you already are thinking about it. This is what I'm going to be eating, even if it's something small. Maybe your goal is to just have that 1 cup of water in the morning. Maybe you want to try bringing a healthy dish to your dinner party, offering to bring a healthy pie or healthy stuffing, maybe a vegetarian dish that might not be offered. Or maybe your goal is to increase your hydration that day, or at least stick to a minimum of 6 cups, something like that. And just pay attention to how this makes you feel. Again, our goal is to enjoy the holidays. We want to have a good time, but just be curious and see how this affects you. And maybe you can use the same goal for the next holiday or modify it if needed. And then we want to have another workshop again next month, so you can come back and let us know how that went. All right, great. So does anyone have any other questions? I know we've gone a little bit over the half-hour mark, but if you have any questions, please write them in the chat, or you can come on camera or audio and let us know. Yes, and our website for our practice is in the chat. Kirtana just shared it, so you can learn more about our practice, what makes us really unique. We have a lot of great YouTube videos. Dr. Nishi Bhopal and I talk about things like mindful eating, intuitive eating, gut-brain axis. So it's a really great way to learn about our practice. All right, great. Well, thank you again, everyone, for taking the time out of your day to join us. Yes, our next workshop will be on Tuesday, December 19th at the same time, 12:30 Pacific Standard Time. So make sure to sign up, and we hope to see you all there. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.